I'll concede your point just for brevity. But
What? Brevity? We don't do that around here. It's probably
No.
citrus, or what is a Capital One Bowl? It used to be Citrus Bowl, right?
oh my
Capital
God,
One.
dude, where have you been?
I just like the real name.
It hasn't been the Citrus Bowl since like what 2002?
What was your highlight side dish from Thanksgiving?
Oh gosh, Scotch.
This is the Buck Around, the podcast devoted to all things Wisconsin Badger football from a fan perspective. Featuring your hosts, Richard Branch and Maxwell Brusky.
And hello, everyone, and welcome back to the Buck Around. Welcome back to episode 346 of the Buck Around. Let me move this mic so it's in a better spot and I don't sound like an echoey person. The not echoey person you hear is one half of the Buck Around, Richard Branch, and I am joined, as always, by my ebullient and positive colleague, Maxwell Brusky. Max, that thumbs up you gave me when I asked, "Are you ready?" was like the most enthusiastic thing you've ever done. So,
That for me, that's
Yeah.
saying something.
yes,
bro.
like
'Cause
you were like, "Here we
I
go."
get ebullient and positive and enthusiastic a lot in my life.
Do you?
Oh, I think those are probably like if I had to describe myself, I think that those would be, some of the words I would use, but
Really?
moreover, they would be words that others would use.
Wow. I thought I was being original.
No, my mother would say it. So, I mean, that's original, right?
It is, I guess. Yeah. I mean, well, it also explains where you sort of learn to be the vocabularian.
Oh, yeah, for sure. Absolutely. Yeah, my mother would be so proud to hear that. Yeah. my dad is probably actually better than her, believe it or not. But he's pretty good.
So, hello, everyone. Apologies again for this is 2 episodes in a row with a bit of a longer interregnum than usual. I'm going to try to do your vocabulary and see. I'm trying to up you there.
That was good, yeah.
But we were scheduled to record about 10 days ago, and then I got a flat tire, and I was leaving for a vacation, and I needed a car the day
Literally,
before.
a flat tire, yes.
Literally a flat tire.
It's not a euphemism.
Nope.
It's not a metaphor.
It is exactly what happened, and it was annoying. Flat tire in a brand new car, too. So it was a real kick in the shins, or wherever you want to get kicked. But,
Kicking the tires.
yeah, unfortunately, I should have done that before I started rolling. But we are back. We are ready to talk Badgers in this late February, Badger football specifically. And, well, it is a quiet time of year, certainly. And as we were just saying before we hit the button, it feels even quieter than usual. But in the world of, or measuring on the scale of media blitzes, Luke Fickell had a bit of a, I guess you could say, a media blitz in the last week and a half or so with multiple sit-down interviews with both the people at Badger Extra, wow, you just combined them, at Badger Extra and The Athletic. So we had articles with rather extensive quotations from Luke Fickell from both Colton Bartholomew and Jesse Temple that we wanted to get into because it felt like between these 2 articles, there were a lot, obviously, because they're asking similar questions or asking about similar aspects of things, but there were a lot of common themes that I feel like they delved into. And I think for us, it just maybe like, what do you take from this stuff? And what can you divine, when he's, to use your term before we hit the button, like, how much is hidden and veiled in coach speak? Like, how do we like sort of get down in the chicken bones there and see what's really being said? I think you can get some of that from the interview. And
So you say that, and the line that jumps out for me is, if we can't be honest with each other, then it's really difficult to move forward.
yeah, I think we're breaking up. So, yeah, I think we should just dive in because in these articles, and I think there's some more coming, I'm sure these guys, in 30 minutes, you're going to get a lot that you're going to keep reusing because they don't get that much access to the guy. But given the fact that, well, they had some really meaty quotes, I think it's worth delving into and sort of use it as an exercise to say, like, where do we think Luke Fickell is with this team and what's he thinking about? And again, as we always say, well, this stuff is all good, but what does it mean? So, all right, let's dive into this. And then, I should mention this. I should have mentioned this at the top. Well, we also are going to talk about Danny O'Neill as we promised last episode. So we'll get to him after.
That'll be part 2.
Yes.
So part 2 of this episode, part 2 of the quarterback room makeover review.
Yes. But we hadn't forgot about that. So we will get to it. All right. So I thought it was interesting. In both interviews, because this is kind of what he has to do right now. Like, you think about, like, what is the point of what he's doing here? And he's sort of doing like a State of the Union.
Yep.
And he doesn't have a lot of union to state, so to speak.
Well, I don't know if that's the way to put it, because there's plenty of union to state. There's just isn't much to. There's not a heck of a lot of positive.
All right.
Positive and tangible.
Correct.
Right. I think there's plenty of positive intangible. If you're an optimist like I am, because I'm so positive, ebullient, and enthusiastic. But as far as that goes, I think there's plenty of union to state. It's just, I don't know. The approach, I wonder if every coach is doing this sort of thing. I just feel like I think what these show is like, he knows what people are talking about and thinking about. And I think he's trying to be, I guess, I don't know. I feel like he's trying to be honest with everybody, that's what I feel like.
Okay. I mean, I feel like he is, how would I put it? I don't disagree with any of that. I mean, I think he's marginally transparent. I mean, not that he isn't transparent, but a lot of it is wrapped. Like, I do think you sort of have to read things, because he's funny. He's a far more, quite frankly, articulate person with this stuff than Christ, because Christ will just start saying things and, like, the mouth would go on autopilot and then words would come out that would kind of mean something.
Although I think Christ is, if you had a graph, he'd be like at a pole, not in the middle.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? He'd get a pole.
So you're right. So you're not, but so definitely, like, we're not saying much by saying that, but I do think you sort of have to read into it. And it's funny when he talks and the words are sort of transcribed into texts, you have to read it 2 or 3 times. Both of these, I sort of had to read like 2 or 3 times to sort of understand what he was saying. And then once I read it and I sort of like tried to read it to myself out loud and figure out, sort of intonation and all that kind of stuff. Then, okay, I think I kind of get it. So here, I got a couple here that I want to talk about, because the first thing he does address.
Do you want to read them or read the sections, then talk, and then read the next one? Yeah. Okay, good.
Yeah.
Right.
I mean, we can do there's 2 of them here that there's like 3 sort of big themes he touched on that I feel like were notable. Yeah. First one was the losing, right? And obviously there's overlap in all this stuff, but where he sort of explicitly talked about losing with both of them. So with Badger Extra, this one I think is kind of the biggest one and the most explicit thing he says in the whole thing. But he says, quote, "When you lose, it's you either quit or you start making excuses or you start pointing fingers. There's a lot of things that fall into losing. And then there's times when you don't win. Unfortunately, at the end of the year this past year, we lost. If you don't win, there's a lot of growth in it. And I think that you got to be able to use that growth to make you better. When you lose, there's a lot of things that are crumbling from within that you got to find a way to recognize and understand. And I'm not sure that I understood it quite as much. I don't think our guys did as well as they got into it, excuse me. If it went to an L, it was an L. And I don't know, maybe just moved on. But there's a distinct difference. And I hope and believe that's a part of our ability to be honest with each other as a program and our way to use that stuff to grow. It's not being negative because sometimes you don't want to harp upon the negatives, but that's what I try and tell them. Not harping on the negative, but there's a difference between losing and not winning. We need to recognize what that is. That's basically saying the team quit, right?
No, I don't think so. I don't take it that way.
What do you think that means?
I didn't know what the hell happened, and it's the first time that's happened to me, and I'm being very contrite about that.
You do?
I do.
Because when he says there's a difference between not winning and losing?
Sure. Well, look at the Oregon game, like that's a game they didn't win.
Uh-huh.
Okay. The Nebraska game, that's a game they lost. And I don't know. I don't get a quit out of there. I think maybe there's some that did, but I don't know. What makes you think that?
Well, because he says when you lose, you start making excuses. You start pointing fingers.
Right.
And you are crumbling from within.
Mm-hmm.
He didn't say they didn't win. He's creating this sort of like a dividing line in his mind where they're, okay, you're grinding and you come up short in the score versus, discontent, anger, frustration, a lack of whatever you want to call it, unity. I feel like he felt like he lost. I think it's what we were kind of saying at the end. We're like, they're all tired and they are ready for this year to end. Like they had checked out. They were done. And the team, I think his issue was he didn't see his team getting better as the year went on.
There's frustration in that. And I think that when he says, and I'm not sure that I understood it quite as much.
Right.
I think that's the key one there. And I think that's how he came off at those press conferences. It's like, I'm freaking exasperated. I've never had to deal with this before. And what it is, I'm not throwing, there is no way in hell I will ever throw anybody, including, I like it later, we'll get to it later, including Phil Longo under the bus.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. I'm never going to do that. And I think this is the same thing where he's taken it upon himself. And I think he's being like contrite in terms of, I ran out of answers myself.
All right. Okay.
And I think he's coming up with answers now. But to the broader point, I think it's really saying to fans that bear with me. There's a lot. You guys need to understand, and I'm begging you to understand that I was in uncharted territory for me. And I was feeling my way through this too. And I think you're right in terms of he was extremely frustrated. And I don't want to get ahead of ourselves in losing. But I think like the team was bereft of players that refused to lose.
Okay.
You know what I mean? You can think, how many can you think of off the top of your head if I said that's like the old guys that were like the backbones of the teams, like the Mike Taylors and the Chris Borlands and the Joe Stelmachers, or, people like that just refuse to lose.
Mm-hmm.
And so we're not losing today. Like Hunter Wohler's the only one to me that comes to my mind.
Yeah, but I guess you're kind of saying what I'm putting it in a much more simplistic and harsh way, but I do feel like his issue was they didn't punch back. And here, let me do this. Let's read the second one that's from Jesse's article, because I think it ties into it. And that's kind of what I'm getting at just before. So we're not just saying the same things back and forth to each other. Yeah. So in Jesse's article, the line is this. He said, what I would kick myself for is coming in and thinking, okay, we're the best team in the Big Ten West, and everybody in that locker room and that history of the last 15 years would say we're the best team in the West. And the truth of the matter is we are not. I know it's not the Big Ten West anymore, but it's that idea of let's just humble ourselves and let go and work our way back and figure out how Coach Alvarez and them took this place to become the best in the West. And let's get ourselves to that point, and then everything else will take care of itself. It's not the best 11, it's the best 11 that do together that give us a chance. The same way they built it here over the last 25 years. I know the Alvarez thing and some of that is fan service and speaking to the sweater vest crowd, because that's how you do that, is keep mentioning the guy from 4 coaches ago. But I would argue
it's a little more than that, I think. But yeah, go ahead.
What he's doing here is, I think his basic point is that this is where I think it gets interesting. And I truncated that quote a little bit because it was hard to put in context. But if you go read the article, I don't think I changed anything by putting it that way. But I think that is the closest he gets to an admission of some rot. And that's why I feel like when I look at those two quotes together, like he's saying them to two different people at two different times. So you sort of like, I'm trying to like triangulate what's in his head when he's talking. When, because you're not going to, if you're a football coach, you can't be like, yeah, these guys quit and they're not good, right?
Right. Like I said, he's never going to throw anyone under the bus. Yeah, I know. I agree. Yeah.
But you know what's in his head and he's trying to say it in different ways in different interviews. I feel like you can kind of triangulate the thoughts is what I'm getting at. And for me, those two together tells me I think he has come to terms with the fact that he didn't have the roster. Like what we've said is like this roster isn't a thing with necessarily a coach or anything. I just don't feel like that there's not players on this, right?
Mm-hmm.
There's no Keanu Benton in there. There's no Nick Herbig. The only one they got is Wohler, right? And
he was like he really was. Yeah, and not just talent wise, but like the way that everybody became accustomed to in the last 15 years when they were the best in the Big Ten West.
Right. And there just weren't those guys. And I feel like those two things pair for me, where he's talking about, they're losing versus not winning and how they kind of go flat. And a lot of that it was interesting when he says it's not the best 11 guys, it's the best 11 working together. I feel like two of these together, when he's talking about them losing and why they lost, that, man, it just smells like a guy who feels like maybe there wasn't a buy-in and there wasn't an ability to get through. Because it does tie into the roster makeup part, I guess, which, you know what, we'll just go right into it because I think the theme continues well into the next one because Colton had another quote from the guy that I think is interesting. And this is I think to you, like your contrition and more of a mea culpa.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
So he says, I hadn't done a good enough job as a leader of really being honest. Sometimes honesty is very difficult. And sometimes honesty can be a demotivator for some. I wasn't honest enough with us to say, look, guys, we're not better than so-and-so. Honesty comes with being self-reflective to say, okay, where are we? Let's embrace the idea of where we really are and don't think we're someplace that we're not. If we can't be honest with each other, then it's really difficult to move forward. We're 5-2 last year. Then hits the fan. We didn't recover, and that's when you gotta really look internally. We weren't in a place where we were built to be able to sustain and grow and play our best ball at the end of the year. It starts systematically, I think, and then it goes into the roster you have. That's my emphasis.
Yeah.
And so in some ways, yeah, you have to adjust and make the changes that you need to make. I think this, maybe of all of them, is the beefiest one without specifics. The thing about honesty is interesting because I think it ties into that. The reason I want to get into it, because I think it's also like the Big Ten West entitlement thing, where it's like, we're the 10-2 team, we're going to be 10-2 forever.
Yeah, yeah.
In those players' minds. I do think maybe there was some tiptoeing when he came in the door because he felt like he was coming into something that was a really well-oiled and functioning machine. And maybe it wasn't what he thought it was, and he's still sorting that out. I do think that's the interesting one to me, because when he says like honesty is difficult and we're not better than so-and-so. I think this is the article, I don't have it open in front of me, but one of them, he mentioned something like the team basically deflated like a balloon after Penn State. They didn't put the quote he put in, but they said Fickell attributed blah, 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 blah. And then I think this one was laid out right after it.
Sure.
So I do think it's interesting. I wonder what he means by that. Like, what does he mean by we're not better than so-and-so?
I think he means like he's like quoting himself. This like, you guys are better than, like, we're the better team here, guys. That sort of thing. And he's admitting that if he did that, I think he's admitting he did that sort of thing and didn't realize, but he maybe chose to blow sunshine up their skirts. Instead of saying, when you were reading that quote, I don't know if you heard me cracking up, but I was thinking of that Rob Schneider meme, and I don't know if I forgot what movie it's from. But he goes, "Oh, we suck again."
That's I think it's
you know what I'm talking about.
Isn't that the Waterboy? Maybe
I think it is the Waterboy.
It's an Adam Sandler vehicle, so it's the same.
Definitely is. Yeah, absolutely. But you know what I'm talking about. Like, yeah. No, we suck again.
Yes. No, I know exactly.
I think he didn't. Yeah, and I think it's more like that, and that's when he's talking about the honesty thing and then I think then you go back to the motivational thing about the honesty tends to be a demotivator. It's like, dude, you suck. No, you're not as good as you think you are. And I don't know. I think he's admitting that he didn't know how to approach that properly. And there's also some question as to when he truly realize that. And I think if you look at like our predictions and the fan base's predictions for 2023 and 2024, including yours, like he thought they were better than they were too. You know what I mean? And I think that a lot of that came from, the past 15 years. And it's, I don't know, because when you're reading that too, I was thinking of that evil Luke Fickell thing after the Iowa game, which I just love, and I still play it a lot. When he talks about Chris and Bielema, that whole thing. But I think he thought it was better than it was, and I think you're getting a little bit more honesty on that. And I think he's also saying that I thought this was better than it was.
Yeah.
And like you said, it's the beefiest thing you're going to get.
Yeah.
And he's not throwing anybody under the bus. He's still talking in generalities, but there's another element of contrition there that he didn't realize. And he's admitting he didn't realize that not only was there a lack of talent, there was also a sense of entitlement there. That
right,
or like I shouldn't say entitlement, and I think it's that's the wrong word to use. I think it's more complacency, and I think you could see that too. In a lot of these games over the past 2 seasons, where even this season, even in the later games, after Penn State, where a lot of those guys still played like they just could show up and win and not have to earn it.
Maybe so here's what I'm trying to think. Again, where you're trying to divine something when he says, let's embrace the idea of where we really are and don't think we're someplace we're not. What did he mean? Like, what is where you, because he then says, we weren't in a place where we were built to be able to sustain and grow and play our best ball at the end of the year. Like, I do think that, like, looking back on the season, it's a team that never got better, right? Obviously, starting quarterback, I get it, but that was by the end of the year, that guy isn't the backup quarterback, right?
Oh, God. I think
we'll get to Brady
midway
Rock
through
in a
the
second.
year, he's not. Yeah. Oh, yeah.
But he's no longer the backup quarterback. He's getting all the 1 reps.
Mm-hmm.
It starts systematically.
I'm laughing again because I'm thinking I'm out here trying to win games with Brady.
Yeah. I mean, it says it starts systematically,
Mm-hmm.
which I'm wondering what does he mean systematically? Is he talking literally system?
No. I think he means systemic as opposed to systematic.
Maybe.
Yeah, that's
no.
Systematic. No. Like, those are 2 different things. I think he means systemic.
Well,
you see that you see those words used incorrectly,
maybe,
or interchangeably, and they're not. They're 2 very different things.
But hang on. But then he says, and then it goes into the roster that you have, and in some ways, you have to adjust and make the changes that you need to make. So it's like, I don't know, Matt. Like, he gets back into that a little later when we talk about the air raid stuff at the end, but I am very curious I'm wondering how much of that is his view of, right? I mean, when he's talking about you have to adjust and make the changes that you need to make, is that canning Longo, right? With 3 games to go in the season. Like, you wonder I keep coming back to that. I wonder what that means, just because I do think the first half of the thought is, oh boy, this roster wasn't what I thought it was. Because then he says, it goes into the roster that you have, blah, 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 which, again, does that mean the backup quarterback? Does that mean you're not adjusting to just having a backup quarterback? You got to do something different. I don't know. Or is it the larger systemic roster issue that he has? If we're going to keep talking about systematically,
I think that's where he was going with that.
Yeah, because that's the part I'm trying to figure out.
It had a lot to do with the fact that, okay, Phil, I get it. I brought you in here to do this, but like, bro, we don't have the pieces for you to do this, so you got to do something else.
Yeah, I wonder.
And to your point, I also wonder if too, like, changing something that had they won one of those games, or had they won a game, like, I don't know, what was the last game that Longo coach? Wasn't the Oregon game, was it?
Was it Iowa?
No, I think it was the Oregon game.
Was it Oregon? Okay.
But had they won that, or had they won one other game, I wonder, I wonder if he'd have stayed. Anyway, why don't you read the other one, the Athletic one?
Yeah, so you're right. By the way, it was after Oregon. I just looked it up while you were talking. Yeah. So the next one, I just thought this one was kind of interesting more because it's not as meaty, but it made me scratch my head. All right, he says, you've got to be bigger. You've got to be stronger. You've got to be able to win the line of scrimmage. If there's anything that they've done here that's given them a chance to be as good as they have been over the last 25 years, it sure as hell is going to be to continue to be at the line of scrimmage. To be quite honest, as we went the other direction in those last 5 weeks, it became more evident on the defensive line than it did anything else. That one's pretty explicit.
So he did throw them under the bus.
Yes. Well, I mean, they also brought in every defensive lineman with a pulse in the portal. I mean,
for sure. Oh, yeah.
So I do think it's interesting. I just thought it was interesting because he talked about the line of scrimmage, and I thought he was talking about the offensive line at first. I'm like, yeah, the offensive line's fine. But
the offensive line's fine.
Then when he's like,
maybe he wanted to make sure that people understood that the offensive line was fine. But I thought they were too.
There was a flip side of it for me too, which is, I don't know about you, but I don't think of Wisconsin's, especially the latest run, to have much to do with the defensive line. Like, I mean, yeah, there's Keanu in there, and yeah, there's Matt Henningsen, but like, I don't know. This is not a school with a great lineage of defensive linemen. I know we don't have to talk about.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, there's a couple stand-up players, but I think, over the last the last 5 seasons, right up until probably the last Chris one and maybe 2018, they stopped the run really, really, really well.
Yeah,
like in 2021, I mean, what were they? They were allowing like what, 70 yards a game?
Yeah, but how much of that is impactful defensive linemen versus lane clogging defensive linemen that feed into linebackers with impactful linebacker play behind it, right? I guess that's more what I was thinking of.
I suppose, but I don't think you can be like stopping the run as a front seven thing.
Mm-hmm.
It's not just, you know what I mean? You can't. And you saw it this year. I mean, you do need a plus defensive line in order to do that, which is what they had before, as opposed to a -1, which is what they had this year.
I mean, they definitely had a -1 this year.
I don't think it's misplaced. The bottom line is I don't think it's misplaced to say that.
Okay.
I really don't.
I think I'm probably also being pedantic, to be totally honest, but not important. I get what the gist of it is, but I do think it's interesting that he did point out the defensive line and just the problems they have.
Yeah. Yes.
So it will be interesting to see what happens this year. But then again, back to pointing fingers. I just like this one because he claims to not be pointing a finger.
Well,
with this quote, because he moves on to the offense. With all due
respect,
Yes,
and it's like when you learn in law school, when you're reading Supreme Court decisions, or just when you read the dissent, and it'll all talk about, well, my esteemed brethren. I'm not. You guys are great, but I totally disagree, and you're morons.
Yeah, it's no offense, comma, which is going to be offensive right after.
Yeah.
Perfect. All right. So here's one line when he starts talking about the offense. He says, quote, "I'm not pointing a finger at Phil Longo. I brought him here to run what it is that he runs and thought that we would be able to adapt a little bit more to some of the things I think that would suit us for who we are and what we need to do. Winning can mask that, and a few really good players can mask that. Tanner Mordecai is a really good football player and really good in that system. And had he not gotten hurt in year 1, I really still think things would have been different. But as you go through it, there's just so much predicated in that system on the quarterback. And if you can't get really high-end, great quarterback play, I think it's really difficult to be able to lean on and rely upon, whether it's the O-line or your run game, because that position is so critical. For us, I don't think moving forward, that was the way in which we needed to continue the build." All right, so
why don't you read the Badger Extra one, then we don't have to go back.
Okay, fair point, because they're hand in hand, right?
Yeah,
he said to Colton, quote, "Sometimes I think when you get labeled in a system, as I recognize and reflect, I think there's less flexibility to evolve because you're so tied to it before in that system, air raid, that it's hard to deviate too much from it."
Yep.
So what's interesting, I think both of these tie into the idea of a lack of flexibility on some level, maybe
to a guy named Phil. I don't know.
Yeah. But I don't know. Do you think if Mordecai didn't get hurt, this is a different story? I always think, I'm curious about that because I know he really likes Tanner Mordecai. Like he liked that dude.
I just think it's a little different. Because Mordecai wouldn't have been here. And who knows what would happen if Van Dyke didn't get hurt, but I do think the narrative would have been a little bit different. And I still say they would have won the Iowa game had Mordecai not gone down. They might have had it. So think of this, right? What if they did beat Ohio State with Mordecai playing the whole time?
Different team.
That's a pretty big narrative change, right? So I don't know, whatever. It's all speculative, but I mean, I think there's something to that. I've said that this whole year. So
I'm trying to figure out how much of that would that season be massively different, or is it more like, would Tanner Mordecai served as a better proof of concept and they would have been a better landing spot for quarterbacks? And maybe you're not, the Tyler Van Dyke thing again is a bit of a square peg round hole thing compared to what Mordecai was.
Right.
And is that what they mean by it? And then
that I'm not so sure. I don't know if it would have changed, like you said, landing spot. I don't know about that. I don't know about.
Because
I just know the vibe would be different. The vibe. Going into this season.
Where it takes me is he's looking at that offense and he looked at what Braden Locke did in it. And they looked at how they really couldn't adjust the offense. And then he turns and looks at his quarterback room. And he just said, I don't have somebody in that room that's going to leapfrog this guy significantly and change a narrative.
Yep.
Right. So it was this thing, when he's talking about is this sustainable in the long term? He wasn't seeing, that's what I think it really is there's not a roadmap to it. And I think, the other canaries in the coal mine in retrospect is, like the quarterback they got for next year. And maybe, who knows, Phil Longo knew he was a dead man walking anyways and just kind of was going through the motions, but
probably, I think he probably did.
You go out and you offer, was that kid Jaron Mock, and when they commit and then they don't get any kind of other Power 5 sniff or Power 4 sniff after these guys who kind of come out of nowhere, like you've seen it with the Badgers in the past, where they'll offer a kid early and then the ball starts rolling for him. But when you offer a kid early like that and then nobody else sort of kicks the tires, it's usually a sign. And maybe that's sort of where I still think Fickell sort of looks at it through that lens, like, this thing doesn't seem like it's moving in the right direction. And it's the inability it's that urgency thing, right? Like it goes back to that thing for me, which is like, he didn't see any kind of Longo being like, wow, we have a real issue here and we have to change things when your offense is bad for 2 years, just straight up. So
straight up. Yeah.
I don't think there was anything massively revelatory in here, right? Or revelatory, excuse me.
No, I don't know. No, that's the right word, I think. No, I don't think so either, but it does go with the overall, man, I made mistakes, y'all. You gotta stick with me here. I made mistakes. And here's a couple of the ones I made, and I think he's given some sufficient detail on the mistakes that he's admitting to.
Mm-hmm.
And I just go back to the whole thing that he never had to deal with that before. And I wonder if I don't think he ever felt like hoodwinked or anything like that, but I don't think he realized like how mediocre the roster was. And I know there was a lot of transfers over the last 2 years, but including, several that he brought in from Cincinnati that he would have known pretty well.
Right.
But I just don't think he realized that. And I don't know. It's a difficult situation to be in. In any job or in any leadership position, when you're always going to be in some level of uncharted waters, right? And that's, as a leader, that's fine. That's part of the whole thing. But he was also in a situation where, like, what he had done in the past and the history that he could rely on, or the habits or the concepts and the motivational items and the leadership style, none of it was working, and it didn't work. And since it's football, it does come down to how talented your freaking roster is.
Yeah.
And I think all that is really addressed in here.
I mean, I think to put a bow on what you're thinking, the big question with him coming in, or the thing that I always found most enigmatic when he took the job, was this was the guy that, pushed away Notre Dame the year prior, right? Mm-hmm. So if he was pushing away Notre Dame and then taking this job, he had to have thought the team was in a better place than it was.
Oh, that's a great point. Yeah, that's a great point. Because
why would you take it otherwise? Like, it was a mistake, right? Or a misread, or whatever you want to call it. But he thought this place was going to be a much easier fix than it was. I mean, because Notre Dame...
And that's just really hard to do for anybody. It's like, oh my God, this is not what I thought it was.
Yeah, it's interesting.
Yeah.
All right, so let's put a bow on that. We'll tie that up, put it away. It's worth a read if you have either subscription, just to kind of poke through them. But let's move on to our promised topic from last episode that we said we'd get into, which is talking about the second quarterback the Badgers took in the transfer portal. The second quarterback with a lot of available play that you can see, a lot of tape out there, and that is Danny O'Neal, transfer from San Diego State. So my family thinks I'm very, very strange because I have spent the last month or so watching a lot of college football games from the past season that aren't Badger games.
It took them that long to realize that.
Well, and watching bad football teams.
Yeah.
Because my son has been like, why this team is bad, especially with Maryland. I mean, he was like, this team's bad.
Well, you know, like one of my favorite items or favorite concepts or favorite things to throw around is you watched it, so we didn't have it.
Well, I did it. And the other thing is, I'm going to mention right now, let's just put it this way. Be happy you're not a fan of a G5 team. Because in a lot of situations, and this San Diego State team is an example of it, it is really hard to find replays of some of these games because they don't have a media contract with one of like the biggies. So you're not going into like, you know, the Fox Sports app or the this app or whatever and finding a replay. So I was fortunate enough to realize that I had my YouTube TV set up to record every single college football game that was out there. So I have like 6,000 college football games in my account on YouTube TV, but then they time out. So
yeah, sure.
Unfortunately, I am missing one performance that I didn't get to see of Mr. O'Neal, and that was his initial game against Texas A&M Commerce, which I think I can probably figure out enough without that game. It was his initial start. It would be kind of interesting just to see him as a true freshman, but not important. So let's talk about Danny O'Neal.
For the Texas A&M Commerce game, though, it was game one for the Aztecs last year.
Correct.
And his stats were 22 for 33.
Yeah.
So that's 2/3 completed passes. And then 214 yards, 6.5 yards per attempt, 2 touchdowns, no interception, and a 141 rating. So he did pretty well that game.
He played well against an FCS team as an initial start.
Yes.
So let's talk about San Diego State a little bit and a little bit about Danny O'Neal. All right, so here's what you need to know about San Diego State. I'll go quicker than we did last time because I had like a long worry, but I was traumatized by a bad offensive line against Maryland. But this team, even though they were, I think, 3-9 at the end, wasn't as traumatizing. So this was Sean Lewis, who Badger fans should know. He is a Badger alum. He was the offensive coordinator at Colorado in 2023, who lost play calling duties halfway through the season, got fired, and then became the head coach at San Diego State. Not a bad way to get fired.
No.
Danny.
Also a very hot name, though.
Yes.
Had Jim Leonard gotten the job.
Correct. There was a lot of speculation that he might have been an offensive coordinator at Wisconsin had that come through. So, yes, you've heard his name if you're someone who listens to Badger Football Podcasts in February. I know that. So, not telling you anything you don't already know. He runs an air raid offense very similar to what Phil Longo likes to do or what the Badgers. It's so funny. You realize after watching it for the past 2 years with the Badgers, when you turn on another team, you immediately like, oh my gosh, it's an air raid offense. Like it takes you one snap to recognize it because of just between formations, the play structure, the RPO stuff, the way
it's a big box.
Yeah, the way the receivers run routes.
Yeah,
like
it's just a big box.
They're doing that thing. Everybody's curling in under the zone. Like there it is. Oh, it's man. There goes the X deep. Like you see it right away. I mean, it looks immediately familiar. It was designed to run a lot faster than what Wisconsin did. The first 3 games, well, I can't say the Commerce game again because I didn't see it, but the first 3 games that I watched him play, they ran this offense real fast, like snapping the ball within 15 seconds every time. I mean, the broadcasters had to stop showing replays because you would have the ball off before the replay is done. And it's like, guys, we got to get out of our habits. Like you need to adapt to what this team's doing. And it was the same broadcast team for the first half of the season. It was all these weird I don't remember who it was, but not important. But very fast, very familiar looking, and also, much like the Badgers, not very good. I think they averaged, what did they average? 21.3 points per game compared to the Badgers at 22.6, just to give you a sense of what the offense was doing. But their problem was different than the Badgers. They had some injuries as the season went on, lost some offensive linemen, but the thing that killed them was the penalties. They had so many penalties. They were procedural. They were offensive pass interference. They had 3 offensive pass interferences in a game at one point. It was a little rough. But the offense itself, like as you watched the season, you kind of got from it like what they were trying to do, which is they had this running back, Marquez Cooper, who is I think he was the FBS leader in rushing yards at the end of the season last year because he had 4,000 yard seasons. I mean, this guy ran for 1,200. He was a very throwback back. Like he would carry the ball like 35 times for 4.1 yards per carry type of thing. And the idea was Danny O'Neil, being a true freshman, was there to sort of like balance him out, just to keep the defenses honest. Like this was an air raid that wasn't going to be so quarterback heavy was the idea. And Cooper is very much a grindy back. Like he's a bit of a funny fit for this offense. He kind of reminds you of Braylon Allen a little bit, not in the build, but in terms of like a bit of fish out of water in the offense.
Yeah.
Like Braylon Allen fits in more of an NFL style, since we're going to use that phrase now, versus an air raid. This guy looks like he would be much better in an I formation behind a fullback. He just does. Just the way he runs.
You know what's crazy about that too? And especially, I guess, the air raid, not that this matters, but when most people think of San Diego State, I mean, that's Marshall Faulk, right?
Right.
Is LaDainian Tomlinson too? Or no, he's TCU. That's right.
He's TCU. Yeah.
Donnell Pumphrey.
Yeah.
Yeah, like they have like kind of a running back tradition.
Right.
Which this dude clearly was, like right in that, like out of that mold.
Well, this is also technically, though, his third stop. He was 2 years at Toledo, and then I think he was wherever Sean Lewis was. I forget. Where was he before? Kent State?
Kent State.
Yeah, sorry. He started 2 years at Kent State. Then he put himself in the portal, ended up somewhere in the MAC. I think it was Toledo. I think he thought he was going to move up, and he didn't. And then he portaled again and followed Lewis to San Diego State. So this was stop number 3. So yes, he's San Diego State running back, but I wouldn't call him part of like the pet. You know what I mean?
Yeah, sure.
But not important.
Well, that's probably some of. Yeah, I get it.
Anyways, I'm breaking my promise. Let's get back to Danny O'Neil. So interesting guy.
No, I broke your promise.
First true freshman to start at quarterback at San Diego State ever. He beat out 3 transfer guys. He had AJ Duffy. Sorry, not 3 transfer, but 3 guys. AJ Duffy, who is a third-year quarterback, FSU transfer, former 4-star. Kind of one. He's like one of those guys that he's not a 4-star anymore, but he's tried. He beat out this guy Kyle Crum, who was a third-year sophomore, kind of backup. He was a scholarship player, but there's not much on him. And then he beat out a redshirt freshman, Javance Tuapoata Johnson, I think is how you say his name. He was a redshirt freshman. I think he was, until Danny O'Neil came along, he was the highest rated quarterback recruit they'd ever gotten. Had offers from Oregon, Arizona State, and Florida State. So not an insignificant group he beat out.
No, not at all.
Danny O'Neil is also not a sort of out of nowhere recruit either. He's, like a high 3-star on 247. He was actually committed to Colorado with Lewis and then followed him to San Diego State. So
Lewis.
Yeah, he was a power.
Well, that probably gave him a little bit of a leg up too. And where's he from again? I forgot.
Indiana.
Is he from Colorado?
No,
Indiana.
From Indiana. So part of the move he's claiming is he's trying to be closer to home.
Sure.
You know where? Interesting guy.
I keep asking you this. I'm going to look it up myself, but do you know where in Indiana?
I think it's Carmel.
Oh, so the Indy area.
I think that you can look it up and double check me as I go through some of it.
It's Indy area. Yep.
What is interesting about him, the first thing that jumps off, I'm going to be honest, when you watch this guy, is he's not big. He's small. He's 6 feet tall, and they say 195. He looks smaller than Braden Locke to me. in terms of physical. I mean, I think that 6 feet may be a bit of a stretch.
All I can think of, especially with the air raid thing, is Drew Brees, man.
Yeah.
Drew Brees.
But the comparison, and this is where I'm going to start, it's going to scare people, but I'll explain how it doesn't scare me at the end. He reminds me of Braden Locke in other ways as well. He does not have a big arm, straight up. It's really interesting to see a guy like this. Yeah. Is that he was, like that mid to high 3-star guy he's sort of less than ideal physically, but he does not have a big arm. There's a lot of lollipop deep balls. A lot of it is touch pass. A lot of it is drop it in over a guy. There's not, the across the hash dart that you'd see out of a Tyler Van Dyke that we talked about last time.
Yep.
He does not have that arm, straight up. That's not what he has. Where he's better than, say, a Braden Locke is mobility. He's not a supernatural runner, but he's far more athletic. I would argue he sort of has that, when we were talking about Billy Edwards last time, where it's like he's a willing runner, but I wouldn't call him like a super athletic runner. He's more of like a kind of like a bigger runner, like a tight end style runner. No, this guy's got a little more wiggle. He can make a guy miss a little bit with that wiggle, and he runs more like Mordecai did than, say, Tyler Van Dyke did or Billy Edwards does. He's not a guy that runs a lot. It looks like earlier in the year when they would do zone reads, he should have pulled the ball more than he did, and he just didn't. I think they kind of waited to get him comfortable with the offense. Again, true freshman and all that. But when he did run, he ran well enough. Like, he's going to keep a defense honest. He's going to extend a play, all that kind of stuff. But the trickiest thing to figure out with him is going to be like what throws he can make, because the arm isn't big. But I do know why they went and got him. And this is the part that is not measurable for me, but it's the thing that I settled in on this last year, and I still stand by it. It's when you make that Braden Locke comparison, because that's really who you're looking at. If you're looking at a skill set, it's a slightly more mobile Braden Locke.
Sure.
But there's one thing that he never had, and I will use his worst game as the example. So they played Boise State, a 3-9 San Diego State team, which was what they figured out, what they finished up at. Yeah. They're not going to beat Boise State, right? No. They lost 56-24 to Boise State. They got the doors.
Boise State's pretty good.
Yeah. And they were down 28-0, I think basically at the end of the first quarter, if I'm not mistaken.
Sure. Genty had like 3 touchdowns and 120 yards by then.
And they had, so here's the thing. At that point, when they were down, I think it was 28-0, his line, Danny O'Neill's stat line was he was 2 for 10 for 20 yards with 2 interceptions and one of them being a pick six.
Oh my.
It was bad. And he missed some guys on throws, all those things. And it was because his offensive line, his offensive line was getting destroyed. He's rushing the ball out. They are like, they are after him. But here's what.
Looking like a Maryland game.
Yes. But here's what didn't happen. He never got the look. He never had the Braden Locke look where you knew Braden Locke had no business in that game. Like, Braden Locke's eyes were big as saucers, and he was totally overwhelmed. Right after he threw a pick six, this is what holds it for me. Like, this is where I'm like, I get it. He runs over to the sideline right after they throw a pick six to go. I think that was the one that put him down 28-0 or 21-0, whichever one, not important. Does not look phased. Flushed, go. He finishes the game, nothing great, but 12 for 20, 135 yards, 2 touchdowns. Cleans it up. He never gets the look. So
that's pretty impressive, actually.
I will argue for a team that kind of didn't have a lot. It's a little bit of a wonky team. I get why they like him. If you want to watch one game.
Yeah, I was going to say, I got a couple things to add when you get through the list here. So
yes. His best game is clearly against Central Michigan. They lose 22-21 late on stupid penalties. I mean, they committed some amazing penalties to put them out of games. But like, he led them down the field to go up 21 to, I think it was 18 or 19. I forget what it was. It was a very weird game. There was missed 2-point conversions and all this stuff. Like, he led a late drive. I mean, he had 246 yards on 23 attempts, 2 touchdowns, no picks, 10 yards an attempt, everything you'd want. But if you really want to watch a game where you're like, okay, show me the good and the bad of Danny O'Neill, go watch Washington State. when they're playing a team that probably has a little bit better baseline talent, not a ton, but they're probably a little bit better. He gets hurt in the first quarter, goes out for a good period of time, and they play that redshirt freshman kid that I mentioned earlier that he sort of beat out for the starting job. But he gets himself back into the game at the end of the first half and leads I think it's like 2.5 minutes left in the game, leads a touchdown drive to put him back in the game, and really leads the team there. Then later throws a pick against a blitz. So you sort of see a guy who looks younger and inexperienced, but still comes back, leads him down the field, 5 minutes to play, makes a great throw, but they get undone by a bad personal foul that one of their offensive linemen commits, and then a missed PI on 3rd and long, because it's they had 3rd and 5, they converted, but then they get a penalty. It's 3rd and 22. They go for this thing, they miss it, and it's 4th and 22, and it's just like a swan song, and they lose it, and they lose that game by 3. He was going to lead them back and win the game. So he's far from a perfect player, and you see that in that Washington State game, but you see what they like. And, with Fickell, when he talks about I like guys that are winners. I like guys that have that sort of fight, that drive. He's got that thing that Fickell likes about Mordecai, and quite frankly, I'm making my hard hands.
We
about
all
Mordecai.
know how you feel about Tanner Mordecai. Yeah.
He has that vibe.
Yep.
My biggest question on this guy is I don't get the transfer. I legitimately don't get why he's transferring. I feel like if he hung out for another year, he's going to have a much better stat line. He completed 63% of his passes for 6.6 per attempt, 12 touchdowns, 6 picks. It's an okay line.
Not bad at all.
The picks are all kind of clumped together for the most part. It's 2 against a great Boise State team, 1 against Washington State, 2 against UNLV that finished the season ranked.
Yeah. Played for the conference championship.
Yeah. It's all kind of clumped. He didn't throw a pick for the first 4.5 games, and the first pick he threw was because it went off a receiver's hands. So the guy could have gone to that Washington State game without an interception.
Well, those first games included Oregon State.
Yep.
And then Hawaii wasn't that good. Central Michigan, fine. And Wyoming wasn't that good. But there was Oregon State was in there too.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So you're getting, the way I look at it is if this guy is the backup for this year and he's sort of one of the two competing for that job next year, this is a great spot this is a good get. I really think this is a sneaky good get just from a depth and building a sustainable approach to the future perspective. Mm-hmm. He's not starting this coming year, unless we see an injury.
Well, he is the backup.
Yeah. And that's going to be what it is. Billy Edwards is the starter. This guy is your backup, and he is... It's an even shot. I have no issue if this guy's the starter next year. He's not going to be a superstar, but he looks like a guy who can be a good player, and you give him 2 years to sort of figure out the system, get himself comfortable. This is a nice little get. There's not wow physical tools here. He's not going to be a superstar, but he can be a very sound player in this
So
offense.
You already touched on, you gave the season stats, which I was going to say, his, that's important. And his cumulative season stats, pretty solid.
Yeah.
And against a pretty decent schedule too. There's a couple teams in the Mountain West that they didn't play, but being things are what they are. They did play Oregon State and Washington State.
Mm-hmm.
In addition, they played Cal too, but he didn't play in that game.
Correct. He was hurt.
So, and having Boise State, UNLV in that conference, it's not a really a cupcake schedule.
No.
Even if you suck in the Mountain West,
right.
Nevada was 0-7 in the conference, but the rest of the teams were 3-4, 4-3. It's not FCS. Let's put it that way.
No, it's not. It's not Texas A&M Commerce.
It's not.
You're getting some meaningful competition, and I think the biggest it showed me 2 things. One, it's really interesting how it's tricky to grade out these quarterbacks without ideal physical talents. I think that's so much of what makes these ratings is, oh yeah, there's a guy with a big arm. There's your 4 stars. Right.
Right.
And this guy is much more of a gamer. And he's, again, I sort of started to say this, but I still don't quite get. I feel like it would have made sense to me if this kid hung around for another year at San Diego State and put up a better season and then portal it, because it's just an interesting, for me, going from true freshman starter to sophomore backup is a fascinating decision with no guarantee you're going to start in 2026, right?
Yeah, it
is
is
a fascinating proposition if it's just the football. I mean, maybe there is a degree of I want to be close to home, but then it's
Big
like,
Ten. It's not the Mountain West is not the Big Ten.
I get it, but you could make the Big Ten in 2020. I know there's no guarantee that 2025 would be better for him.
Yeah.
Bird in the hand and all that stuff. But I do think it's an interesting value proposition. I mean, then again, you know what? I don't get the corners jumping to Toledo, in the portal. So, Badger corners leaving because they're not starting.
Other than a coach in common over there, but whatever.
But still, I mean,
that's why I said that's why I said whatever. Yeah. No, I agree with you. So one of the things with Locke, the look notwithstanding, is that he has such a grasp of the offense and he's a smart guy. But you know what he wasn't? Like, resourceful.
Yeah.
Do you get the impression from watching a lot of this that they're resourceful? Because that's how they both strike.
I would say maybe when you mean resourceful, I think of it, if I'm saying are they reactive in the moment, right? And adjusting on the fly.
Reactive in the moment, adjusting on the fly, but also there's an element of guerrilla warfare to them.
Yes. Yeah.
You know what I mean? You know what I mean? You're playing Texas, and it's Quinn Ewers and Arch Manning and this all these future pros, and it's just attrition where they can wear you down like a lot of Wisconsin teams used to be. But I think the best Wisconsin teams with the best quarterbacks, the quarterback was resourceful. Like Scott Tolzien was resourceful in addition to being really smart. And I think that's, that was really so much of the basis of Russell Wilson's success is how freaking resourceful he was.
Yeah. I mean, to your point.
You know what I mean?
Yes, I do. I think there's the degree of improvisational stuff, right?
Right.
Both of those guys have that vibe.
It'll be interesting to see my impression with them.
Yes. They are guys who are way more like the things that I take from Billy Edwards, and I haven't seen an interview with Danny O'Neill yet.
I listened to the Billy Edward one, but I haven't because there is one out there with Danny O'Neill. Is there not? Yeah. Okay. I haven't listened to that. But I did listen to the Billy Edwards one.
I listened to him not in that interview. I think it's on the camp, right? I listened to him. He did a Q&A on, I forget, it was on some website, but he got a couple questions that are pretty straightforward, that you can just answer and be done with it and no one will care. But he gave answers that seemed, there was thought to the answer.
Yeah, sure.
And it gives you like a vibe, like there's a guy who, I don't know how to describe it, but it just gives you that vibe. And both of these guys gave me that vibe in the way they play.
And that's ultimately where this thought kind of popped in my head as I was getting ready for the show after our interregnum, that I think one of the things that Wisconsin fans like about a successful Wisconsin quarterback is like the resourcefulness. Like you're smart and you're going to be up against it, and you're up against odds against an Ohio State or an Oregon where you've got to fight a guerrilla battle. And you're not going to get scared, and you're going to be in the moment. But I just think it's the element of not smart play necessarily, because Braden Locke was smart, but it's the resourcefulness part of it.
Right.
And I think that's always been kind of in the Alvarez era too. I think almost all those really successful quarterbacks, I mean, that's what made Brooks Bollinger so good too, And I think that goes back all the way to the previous section of this podcast when talking about these things that Coach Alvarez built. But those were all the best Alvarez quarterbacks too. Yeah. They weren't great. Some of them had a bigger arm, and some of them could run a little bit better than others, or whatever the case may be, that mix. But they were resourceful, and they didn't panic. And if they did panic, they didn't last very long.
It's funny you mention Brooks Bollinger, because now that you say, people who don't remember it, we had him on our podcast way back in the beginning.
We absolutely did. Yeah.
But I remember when he did color commentary, I think it was one of those random FCS games.
Yeah. And remembering so have it back, like we said.
Yeah. He was so good, and he was so smart about it and so technical. And you're like, that's the vibe I get. Here's what I will say. If I'm going to draw a through line, and I'm going to say, what does Fickell look like he has in his quarterback room now versus what he had the last 2 years? I get with Billy Edwards and Danny O'Neill, and I don't know Carter's, what his deal is. I haven't watched his high school tape, and I never get anything from that. I'll wait to see him in a Badger uniform. But at least with these two guys that I've seen, there is a through line and a skill set that's consistent. The weird thing when you really look back at Longo was that first year you had Tanner Mordecai, who's okay, guy knows the air raid. He can throw the ball around, not like a huge arm, but a decent arm, and he's mobile. And then the guy right behind him had none of that. He didn't have the big arm, and he wasn't. And you're like, what are you after? Like, I don't get what the through line from Mordecai to Locke to the next one in line. Like, what is that? There wasn't a consistent through line there. Whereas now I look at them and I say, like, Billy Edwards doesn't have talent that shoots off the page at you the way Tyler Van, or use Tyler Van Dyke in the prior one. Like Tyler Van Dyke and Tanner Mordecai and Braden Locke, like, there is not a consistent through line through those three guys at all for me. With these guys now, it's like, I get what they're going to try and do with them. At least they fit and at least they make sense. And the quarterback they have coming in behind him in this guy sounds like he's in that sort of through line as well. So at least I kind of get what they're trying to find in that quarterback room. So I am not the eternal optimist, as everyone knows, but I will say this. I don't know that either of these guys are going to be great, but I will say I am intrigued by both quarterbacks. And I'm curious to see how it works out for them. So at least I see a pathway here, having looked at these guys, that I say, okay, I get it. I get what they're trying to achieve. There is a coherence to it. So,
you know what, too? And the more and more I think of this, too, I'm like thinking, you talk about a through line, and I think you could talk with a through line between Hornibrook, Coan, and Mertz. But I wouldn't, neither of the three I would consider resourceful. Coan, maybe. But that wasn't a part of his game, because I always felt like he was just more, he's the Long Island Laser. Like, he was more of a, his pocket guy.
Yeah.
I think Houston probably had that to some extent, like, where he was more resourceful, and he was, he's bigger too. But
yeah,
and then but you think of the Chris quarterbacks with Bielema, and Stocco had that. Tolzien had that.
Right.
And obviously Russell Wilson did. So this was a great project that you did. And like I said, you watched all this so we didn't have to. But I think, there's a, like you said, you don't have to be optimistic, but there should be plenty of intriguing. And I think I feel like these guys are at least going to be more fun.
Intrigue is a good word.
For a while.
Yeah.
And that's the thing, like with Coan or even Mertz, like especially Mertz, because he was such a disappointment to compared to his billing. But did you ever have fun watching Jack Coan or Alex Hornibrook play quarterback?
No.
And I felt that way about Tolzien, man. And Tyler Donovan, my God, I loved watching that dude play.
Yeah.
And I think these guys have that. I mean, watching Braden Locke play football was like freaking, it's like going to the dentist.
Well, it was bad. I mean, there's that.
Yeah.
But
passing a kidney stone.
Yeah. You made me realize Jack Coan is like the Camry of quarterbacks. That's really what he was. Like, it's not going to break down. Just change the oil on it, regular service. Don't expect it to, do 110 miles an hour in the left lane, but it's going to get you where you need to go. And that was sort of Jack Coan.
And it'll do 90.
Yeah, maybe.
Yeah.
But I mean,
not 110.
Yeah. They've had a lot, they're trying to break it. These guys are not Camrys. And to sort of wrap it up, for me, like, I don't go like when Tyler Van Dyke at this time last year, I'm like, okay, like maybe they can sand a few of these things down, but he's going to be what he's going to be. Like, I don't feel like there's a ton of sanding down that needs to be done on either of these guys. Like, Danny O'Neal needs to grow, needs time to grow, to mature and do all that. But I get the value proposition there. Billy Edwards with a better team around him, I'm like, oh, okay, I get it. Like, I'm not trying to talk myself into 25-10 and he's going to do some stupid things. Like, I don't get that vibe from either of them. So again, the Prince of Darkness is optimistic's the wrong word. I do like intrigued. That's honestly, that's a better term for it. Like, I get what the vision is. So I think that's the end of my quarterback talk. And we are well over an hour.
We are.
And we're going to get killed by Cody.
My wrap up will be, these two dudes are Danny and Billy. Okay. That's a common thread. It can't go wrong with a Danny and Billy, right?
I guess. I have no idea what that means, but I'll say yes, man.
It's not Bill. It's not William. Billy.
A little more gunslinging.
It's not Daniel. Okay. It's not Daniel Jones.
Good point.
Danny O'Neal.
That's a good point.
Danny O'Neal is the guy you drink with down at Irish Times.
By the way, Danny O'Neal does not own a Camry either. He probably owns something more intriguing. It's more like a tripped out, Subaru or Mitsubishi, those things. Yeah.
Oh, yeah, definitely. I got you.
All right. So on that note, I have no idea what we're talking about. We've taken these metaphors and analogies to weird places, but Get ready for a not Camry spring. We will return. You realize what we're doing next? We're basically talking about spring, man.
Yeah, I was just going to say, I mean, we can come back next week and I think we can start talking some roster development kind of stuff. And
yes.
What is the schedule again? When do they start? It's not next week, but I think, is it the week after?
I think it's the week after. And I know there is an event on April 19th. We don't know exactly what that is. And they have a week-long break, for spring break and all that stuff. So practice is pretty stretched out. So it's coming up.
True too. Yeah.
All right. I'll be interested to see. So
I think we can do that.
On that note, Max, until the next time.
Till the next time, indeed.
All right. Bye-bye, everybody.
Enjoy the conversation? Head on over to buckaroundpodcast.com to find all the ways to connect with the show, links to our Patreon page, and feeds for every major podcasting platform. We want to thank each and every one of our patrons. You make this podcast possible. This has been The Buck Around, Badger football analysis from a fan perspective.